grace, peace, and mercy are yours in the name of the triune God. Amen. Well, tough day for prophets, I guess. Amos and John, poor guys, they're just out there trying to be faithful to the work that God has called them to do, and it seems to land them in the worst and most messy quagmires. They are, after all, prophets, real ones. And the job of a prophet is to tell the truth, often an inconvenient truth, often a truth that sounds like, psst, this is not what God has planned for you. The problem, though, is that if this has been working for you, like it often does for kings, like Jeroboam and like Herod, the truth might not be something that you are quite ready to hear. And indeed, it is the truth that gets Amos kicked out of King Jeroboam's court and John the Baptist arrested and then beheaded. And just in case you missed the details of that gruesome gospel story, here's what happened. Herod, who's king over this particular region of Judea, whilst in Rome, catches sight of his brother's wife and says, "That's what I want right there," and he marries her. John the Baptist publicly suggests that that's not okay. Herod actually likes John, or he at least respects him as a prophet, belonging to this long line of prophetic voices in Jewish history. His new wife Herodias, however, upon hearing John's criticism of her marriage, immediately puts him on her hit list. And I don't mean that as a joke, her actual hit list. Herod's birthday rolls around, and he throws a large and lavish party for this, power-broking, political maneuvering old boys club, at which Herodias' daughter, Salome, dances for him, and this entire assembly of influential and wealthy men. Herod is so pleased by her dancing, which I would assume was a little bit more elaborate than the YMCA, that he offers to give her anything she asks for, even up to half of his kingdom. Salome doesn't know what to ask for, so she runs to her mother and she asks Herodias, "What shall I ask for?" She promptly responds, "Ask for the head of John the Baptist." And even though that request is deeply uncomfortable for Herod, he has made an oath and he cannot lose face in front of his guests, and he orders a guard to go down to the prison and behead John the Baptist. And yes, that severed head is then brought back into a banquet hall and presented to a teenage girl as a reward for being a pleasing dancer in the sight of the assembled men. That is messed up. Yeah. And by the way, it's not exactly premium material for someone who's trying to preach good news to her people on a Sunday morning, but I guess I can't win them all. This story is weird, and it's gross, and it's horrifying, and because of all of that, we like to think that we can distance ourselves from it and dismiss it as being this really weird interlude in an otherwise normal gospel, an interlude that, by the way, has absolutely nothing to do with us. But we know that that's not true, is it? This story still plays out in our world, in our lives, in the American political arena, and elsewhere in and around the history of humanity. People do things they know to be immoral. We place belonging, even belonging gone bad, at a premium over doing what is right. We hurt people who say things that we don't like. Women and girls are still objectified for men's pleasure. I know, without a doubt, I have distanced myself from well-meaning friends who were trying to tell me truth that I was not ready to hear. We do this kind of stuff all the time, actually. And I don't say that to suggest that what Herod did was excusable. What Herod did was reprehensible, but he is not a monster. He's a lot more like us than we think. He knew what he was doing was wrong. My former pastor, Nadia, talks about Herod's guilty conscience on display at the beginning of this narrative. When he hears about Jesus and assumes that someone who is roaming through his territory, healing people and casting out demons, has to be the guy that he beheaded back from the dead, come to haunt him. That is a guilty man's assumption, she says. And Herod, of course, feels that guilt because he knew better, and he did it anyway. And it is in this way, I think, that rather than being a villain, or maybe rather than being simply a villain, Herod also becomes a tragic figure, and not to put it glibly, but also a cautionary tale. One of my favorite modern-day prophets, Gloria Steinem, says that the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. If Herod's story demonstrates anything for us, it's this. If you never work through the truth pissing you off part, the truth being inconvenient part, the truth being hurtful part, the truth being a tough pill to swallow part, you will never get to the freedom part. And look, I get it. When the powers and principalities that are in place work for you, when you are the beneficiary of unjust systems, when you are on the winning side of the inequalities, when you are the heir of the empire, the truth of God's way of equity and justice and a new creation can sound like a threat. And that's because indeed it is a threat to that kind of power and privilege, but it is also a promise that another way, a better way, a more life-giving way is possible, is available, is ready and waiting. So here we see Herod choose death-dealing dominion over life-giving liberation. Why? Maybe the inertia of palace life was just too much for him to overcome on his own. Maybe he feels trapped by this story of who he is, unsure and unable to believe that there is another viable path out there than the one that he's already on. Maybe he is simply clinging to the power he has known all his life, unwilling to lose the position of which he is so enamored. Unaware, it would seem, that it is his need to preserve the very power and position that keep him every bit as captive as do the bars that imprison the prophet in the nearby jail. What Herod seems to miss is this: violent systems are indiscriminate in the harm that they inflict. Systems of economic exploitation, of cultural assimilation and ethnic erasure, systems of disenfranchisement and intentional, perpetual, generational poverty, systems of objectification and dehumanization unleash violence in the world. And violence always, without fail, shackles both victim and perpetrator alike. And while the pursuit of power is an individual undertaking, the pursuit of freedom is a collective enterprise. The pursuit of freedom is a collective enterprise. And in that noble endeavor, truth is the only way forward. I feel like I get to have some authority on this as one who did actually travel the world to live with and to witness communities who, through great adversity, are struggling in the work of peace building. The communities that show the surest hope of a productive peace process and of movement towards justice and harmony are the ones which have cultivated both the courage to tell the truth and the humility to hear it. Accepting the truth is the most crucial element and the only real first step on the path to liberation. Herod's story is an horrific one. There is no good news in it. Believe me, I checked. But maybe that's part of the point here. Maybe we are supposed to notice that this is the only story in Mark's gospel in which Jesus does not make an appearance. We have the benefit, though, of knowing that this is not a standalone story. So unlike Herod, we don't have to feel stuck in cycles of violence and power brokering and political maneuvering and sin and death. We can, and we do, and we will, look elsewhere for stories of an incredible Jesus. Stories of a God who comes alongside us and loves us enough to pluck us out from where we are and put our feet on paths that we couldn't even imagine for ourselves. Stories of a great God, of love and of life and of liberation. Stories that allow us to believe that the freedom that God grants us, we are given as a birthright. So that when we find ourselves caught up in circumstances or systems that are unbecoming the children of God, we can trust wholeheartedly that freedom is coming, if only we are willing to make way for the truth. Amen.